On this episode, we are in the French Alps and we're talking garden maintenance, woodland maintenance, and what we can learn from the French. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Ideanthro. Now this is one of those episodes where, look, I've got to admit, I'm taking the piss a little with the location, making you a little bit jealous. Tay and I are traveling in Europe for a few weeks. We are currently in France, and I wanted to take an opportunity to share with you a few thoughts I've been having, because I've observed a few things that happen a little bit differently in the urban areas, just in the day or two that we've been in France. And I wanted to share that with you because it's been getting me thinking about a few things water-sensitive urban design. This isn't one of those episodes where I have a definitive, we should be doing this. It's more of a case of, okay, here's some ideas, things are done a little bit differently to back home. Maybe there's something we take from it, but the ideas aren't quite formed up yet. So, what's up? We flew in 2 days ago to Geneva and drove just south across the border into France to a town called Annecy. And it's absolutely beautiful. And a few things started to strike us. The first thing we noticed is that there are tons and tons of flower gardens everywhere. There's flower gardens in private property, and there's flower gardens all along the streets, in the medians everywhere, out the front of shops. There were heaps and heaps of them. And we started thinking, look, this is a big investment. There's a lot of money being spent in this. Who's looking after it? Is it private landholders? Is it the council? We weren't quite sure. And the relevance to water-sensitive urban design is that we are currently building lots of stormwater treatment systems and trying to figure out how to pay for maintenance. And we are building, and on the landscaping side of things, there's lots of attempts to beautify our cities with gardens in our cities, trees in our cities. How are we going to pay to maintain that? And it struck me that here was a town or a city or a region in France, in Annecy, that had heaps and heaps of this stuff. And I was really curious to go, oh, maybe there's something we can learn here. So we're like, okay. So we started hypothesizing. And the first thing that we started to notice was when you kind of drive around these areas and you look at the grassed areas, you look at the grass beside the streets, it's really beautiful, but it's also a little bit less refined and a little bit less tidy than back home. And there's you look at the pavement and it's kind of acceptable that bits of the roads or the car parks might be a bit cracked up. The grass isn't cut as short. It's a little bit kind of rough and tumble the way this hill here, it's grass, but it's not uniformly 5 millimeters high turf. And so we're like, okay, maybe the thing here is, maybe there's a different expectation about levels of service, that maybe they're making a trade-off where some of the urban areas are less maintained or less well kept up, there's less money spent on it, and there's a trade happening and they're spending more on these gardens. We weren't quite sure about that. We still weren't sure who was maintaining it. And then we wandered into Annecy the next day, and firstly, Annecy, apparently it's called the Venice of the Alps or something, but there's heaps of canals. It's on a lake, and there's heaps of canals up into the old city, and it's really, really beautiful. And we wandered in, and I'll come back to this bit in a minute, but we saw what looked to be kind of floating gardens or floating wetlands. I'll come back to that in a minute. But we wandered in, and we stumbled across what appeared to be a council maintenance crew looking after the gardens. And so they were these gardens are definitely being maintained because they were watering them. There's no weeds in them. Presumably they're weeding them, but I don't quite know what the weed situation is in Europe, because there's weeds in Australia because prior to European settlement, Australia was so well cut off. We have this very clearly defined concept of what we consider native, and anything that's not native and is a bit invasive is a weed. So in Australia we have this big concept of weeds. I don't know whether that exists in Europe, but the gardens are very much there are ornamental plants in them and nothing else. So I'm assuming there's some sort of unwanted plant control going on. But anyway, there was this crew. They were definitely watering the gardens. They were making really good use of the canals because there was what looks kind of like a fire hydrant or a little pumping station. They parked their truck next to it. They plugged into this pumping station and they were using that to water the gardens. So at least they didn't have transport costs on the water. So that's something where they're saving some money. But, so we saw that, we wandered around, we're going, oh look, we don't quite know what's up, but things are different, it's kind of cool. And then, I suppose final thought, we'll come back to these little floating wetlands. We saw these little floating gardens. It's off topic, this isn't about maintenance, but what struck me about them is if you look really closely in the photo that I'll flick up now, they're I don't know. I couldn't see whether the roots were hanging into the water beneath or whether these literally are just like wooden gardens floating in the water. But they had what appeared to be soil in them. Like the darkness that you see on the surface to me looks like soil. And it was a slightly different way of doing things. Again, I'm not sure of the details, but you know, we're just observing whatever we can. And that's it for this episode. Some things being done differently. If you've got some ideas about like what the expectations or levels of service are for these sorts of gardens in Europe, by all means, hit me up. I'd love to know more. There might be another video in this series in a few days' time as we get further into things. But for now, that's it. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.